3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
Justin Godsey with Eon Batteries.
And this is going to be a 2-for-1 story here, folks, because about a week and a half ago, we did a story on this solar panel pump jack, and it got some great traction, some great activity. Obviously, the contrast was something that caught people's attention. But the reason we did this story was this is the way the world is going, folks. Is I'm not saying it's going solar, it's going collaboration. It's going thinking outside the box with new ideas. In fact, getting rid of the box altogether and recreating an entirely new box. And during that interview, we weren't sure about whether this was being done or not and that sort of thing. And the guys at Ridge Enterprises mentioned they thought they were the first ones. Well, Justin Godsey comes forward with a company that he represents, Green Ox Energy, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to transition into his other company. But first, just to follow up on that story of the solar pump jack. Now, you kind of mentioned that you guys have been doing this for a few years prior to what they had been doing in Kansas. So I'd like to give you guys, your due a little bit and talk about, if you guys are doing it for a few years here. Listen, this isn't about who's first in the marketplace. This is about educating and getting the information out there. So kudos to Ridge Enterprises for doing this, and kudos to Green Ox for doing this as well. So talk to me about that a little, that if you can, just last couple of years, your experience in it. Is it something that you think is viable in the future? We don't have to get into the specifics, but since you guys kind of were the first in the marketplace, what has been your experience in that solar pump jack whole thing?
Yeah, so we had a company come to us, and that was their challenge. They were looking for ways to subsidize or reduce having to put power lines out to remote units and well site, especially stripper wells. So we came together and did a partnership with them to design a system. We went through about 3 different designs. It started with microgrids and utilizing that challenge of the reverse energy flow on the upward and downward motion of the pump jacks, and then came to utilizing the VFD technology in conjunction with it to use just your daylight hours to work with. And it worked well. We were able to work with USDA and gain some pretty good subsidizations from the USDA in regards to it. That's a real big component of it here. So the return numbers are just amazing. But what we found also is, there's in the different applications, there's a lot of applications that are looking for compressor stations and remote stations in areas, and you still need a third tier or second tier backup, whether it's battery or natural gas microturbine generators, that sort of thing. So we shifted gears. We didn't really focus as much as the other guys sound like they're focusing on just that market. And, we started focusing more on battery technology and use, and it kind of led us into another path of utilizing batteries along with solar to improve some of the operations that go along, primarily in like the chemical pump injection sites and RTU units. So
that's interesting you transitioned into that realm, because that was one of the mining, natural resource offshoots, I guess, with kind of some of the stuff going on in the Middle East, is that they're able to do a little bit more mining and a little bit more lithium harvesting, if you will, for some of the batteries that we see in iPads and iPods and cell phones, etc. Talk to me about that battery market a little bit, because it seems like it has grown over the past decade.
Right. So, everybody's heard the whole Tesla boom, and Tesla uses a compound that's called lithium cobalt, right? And lithium cobalt's a great compound. It has some good power density qualities. It has power cycling qualities of long lifetime, that sort of thing. But does have some thermal runaway properties that are not so desirable. So, University of Texas in '96 created the lithium iron phosphate, or LiFePO4 compound. And the LiFePO4 compound has become the most stable, reliable, power dense, and long-term use of the lithium compounds in the market. However, it was kind of the higher dollar, the Cadillac, if you will, of the compounds. And so, we were able to get a hold of that when they released it from patent along with a company called A123 Batteries, and now have access to the physical cells. And so Eon Batteries is our own OEM of those cells. And so we started, after listening to our clients and realizing how much they switch batteries annually for chemical injection sites and for RTU units, and the cost of that in terms of having to service them and send trucks out and truck rolls, the loss of revenue and production due to freeze overs and that sort of thing kind of led us to focus on solving that problem. And so we started deploying some of our direct replacement lithium iron phosphate batteries into traditional lead acid AGM sites, and found that we could increase production or could increase chemical sales to 70% plus is what we've seen so far. So in terms of efficiency and being able for these companies to operate in a low cost of oil environment, their operations are having to be slimmed down. This type of technology just helps their bottom line in operations. So we've seen a huge spike in these type of batteries being deployed to replace your typical lead acid AGMs that are out there. That coupled with the fact that because they're charged, primarily by solar, most of these sites have a small solar panel and charge controller. They're able to qualify for that 30% tax credit that a lot of the solar companies enjoy, right? So a lot of these companies enjoy that ability to replace new technology, take some of that tax credit, reduce operational costs, and then take advantage of some of our added technology into that. I kind of mentioned to you the Bluetooth scenario. So our batteries, you're actually able to Bluetooth into with a cell phone through our app, and you can tell the temperature, the cycle count, and those sort of things of that battery, right? So we're working towards getting it to where you'll be able to transmit some of that deep battery data through existing SCADA units back to existing monitoring and automation companies. So exciting stuff for sure.
What's the size of the unit that we're talking about here? I think a lot of people, when they think of batteries, they think of, AA, AAA, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How big are they? A little bit bigger than a car battery?
Yeah, so direct replacement was our OEM. The reason we call them our direct replacement series is it's just that. They fit the standard mold of an existing battery. So a lot of times, if it's a 300 amp hour battery, a lead acid AGM battery, a lot of folks don't realize in order to maintain that warranty, you can only use about 30% of that rated capacity, right? In the lithium world, and especially the life PO4 world, you can use 100% of that capacity and it doesn't lose memory. Standard batteries kind of lose memory every time you drain them and fill them back up, and ours won't do that. So it's the same size that they're going to replace with. In most cases, we're going to be a direct replacement of the same size battery they're pulling out. Our rating would be a little lower. However, at the 100% usable rating, it's not a fluffed rating like lead acid AGM will give you.
You mentioned tax credit. There's a variety of reasons that oil and gas companies would use something like this, as well as other companies that need remote location. You mentioned tax credit. You mentioned geography. Just talk to me a little bit about some of the positives that, if you're doing a sales call, the positives, but then give me a few of the obstacles that you are finding. You mentioned earlier with the solar rigs, a few of the, the issues that you had there, and those guys from Ridge Enterprises, they mentioned, I think, similar issues too. But talk to me a little bit about some of the hurdles that you're overcoming, and then some of the no-brainer type things too.
The biggest hurdle that we've found is overcoming that upfront cost discussion. right? So, you got guys that are used to replacing batteries at $80 a pop. But when you start digging deeper, you can realize, okay, they're replacing them twice a year. The cost of the service truck to go out and do that is, $150 a truck roll. Then in some cases with a failure, they have a freeze up on the pipeline, and there's a significant cost or loss of production involved in that. So when you take a look at all of that holistically, and compare to the price of our battery, which is going to be about 3 times more what they're used to seeing, right? Then that is the challenge. It's hard for someone to swallow this new tech coming on without the experience. So we've been able to get out into some folks and get some projects done where we've had them in the field now for 18 plus months. And these guys are coming back to us and requesting pallets of batteries now, because this last fall, winter season, that's the biggest challenge in the new year. The biggest challenge of battery longevity. They die. Every one of them start dying at that period. You got a lot of rain. You got a lot of cloudy days. You have short hours of the day. All those type of scenarios happen, and batteries just don't last. So, it's a big battery replacement period. And we had feedback back from some really great companies that just were so excited in the fact that we were the only battery that really improved their operations during that period. In some locations, we're the only one that made it through that period. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot of challenges. Again, the biggest challenge is getting over that number, and then getting, these. In the oil field, we all know they deal with service companies and the corporate folks, and everyone kind of deals with their own thing. And so to get the service guy doesn't care about a tax credit because it doesn't apply to him because he doesn't own it. So it's kind of hard to get to that executive level to make the corporate decision to standardize this type of technology through their operations, and have that executive level understand that replacing 100 or 1,000 batteries and taking a 30% tax credit on that is significant, and that it impacts their bottom line at that level. So getting through that, that red tape that gets you all the way to the top, that's our largest challenge by far.
You mentioned that I call it the technology cost, which is a little bit up front. I've been talking to a few of these guys in the cleanup business, and you're talking about some proprietary, solutions that can capture hydrocarbons and things like that. So there is going to be a little bit of an upfront cost. But where they seem to make their numbers work is the labor, how much they reduce on the labor. And to me, it sounds like your long term is a cost savings. If it's a little bit, call it the sticker shock up front, if you will, because they're not used to that up front or looking at it. But over the course of the long term, it sounds to me like you are seeing significant savings for your companies. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. Through maintenance and service, huge savings. Through production and not losing due to failure, that's a huge. That in itself can pay for these batteries in less than a year. So definitely seeing some of that, and the more we're seeing in the field, the more we get in the field, and these case studies coming back just proves that our assumptions are correct.
Yeah, and that's kind of almost what's going on with a lot of these different projects right now, is they're almost becoming science projects that unfortunately, there's a little bit of time that you have to show everybody that not only does it work, but it works consistently. And, that's one thing I've noticed about this. But once they are okay with it and they feel comfortable with it, then it seems like it's a little bit easier going. And that's just most things with education. Once you go down a path you're familiar with, it's not a scary path anymore. Or if you're driving somewhere, it seems quicker the second time you're there because you're just more familiar with it. Transitioning to shale plays, I wanted to ask you guys, it sounds to me like you could pretty much go in any shale play that doesn't have power lines around. So where are you guys primarily seeing your business, and where are you guys looking at? Are you looking at going to other shale plays outside of the Texas area, or just primarily down in that region?
No, we would love to. The fact that, North Fort Worth is our home and our assembly plant area, that's kind of where we started. So, we're going to existing sites, a lot of existing sites, that really aren't the big plays, right? So it's a market that's available in almost every shale play. We're seeing, a lot down South Texas and a lot in East Texas. We just have not had that ability to start reaching outside of Texas, and now we're starting to see some of these service companies and automation companies start coming to us that are doing more business outside of the Texas area. So, we welcome that, and that's part of our excitement. Talking to you guys is being able to expand that into some of these other shale players.
Yeah, and I think that's really the next stage in oil and gas. What's going on here is there was there's a vetting process, if you will, that's going on to where a big portion of the industry is retiring. And they've built an incredible industry, despite what you read in the news, despite what you hear at the cafes or the bars or anything like that. At the end of the day, the oil and gas industry, which is considered the mining industry, is the only industry that's gained jobs in the last 10 years. It's the only industry. It's the only industry that continues to be a regular at the local cafe, so they're influenced by the church and the culture and the community more than any other industry. And I'll even challenge that against farming, which used to have that title, but farming has changed so much. It's gone so corporate and so mechanical that they've lost that. There's still those members that are part of that industry, but not like it used to be. It's changed. Oil and gas has changed to the tune of where the employees changed, the worker has changed, the executives have changed, and the local communities have changed, all whether it be through technology or whatever, the horizontal fracturing type thing. You and I talked about your roots to North Dakota, especially up there in the Bakken area where the most of your family is. You name dropped a few cities that you've got to be in North Dakota to know those towns exist. So you passed that test. Talk to me a little bit about how your perception is of this oil and gas industry, because you are in a renewable energy, which is very much connected to the old fossil fuel industry. And to me, that's the new norm. That is the new norm, man. Talk away.
Yeah, I think they've always been destined to work together. I come from an oil and gas family in Texas, and I kind of was the black sheep that had to step away and figure all this stuff out. Military, I was always the communications and technology guy, and I've always been fascinated with new technology, and that is kind of pioneering the forward way and the new movement of the way everything's going, right? I think you did a story not too long ago on blockchain, and we're kind of following into those steps of blockchain within energy, right? You're going to see that more and more as it goes, and so I think it's a huge opportunity. It's just going to improve operations and improve. I see it in the U.S. I see it as a strategic point for national security. Distributed energy at the point of use is a huge win for national security. And I think we can all agree on that. With today's threats and these sorts of things, for us to be able to power facilities that produce, the fossil fuels that runs the majority of our military, that's huge. For it to be able to run independent of a huge power station is huge. And, and in some cases with distributed microgrids, that ability allows to be able to provide power to local communities that serve these type of areas. So I think that's huge. That's my goal. I'd love to see distributed power systems, powering pump jacks and all type of operations within the oil and gas community across the U.S., regardless of which shale area we're working with, right? I think it can only better, again, our national security and keep our production live regardless of any event that could happen.